Welcome to Independently Speaking, the new podcast of the Independent Schools Association. Celebrating our diversity, we take pride in representing a broad spectrum of educational settings, including nursery, preparatory, senior, sixth form, and boarding schools. This vibrant network includes institutions specializing in the arts, sports, and faith-based education, along with those offering exceptional assistance for students with special educational needs or disabilities. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Independently Speaking. Now here is your host, ISA Director of Education and Inclusion, Helen Stanton-Tonner.
Welcome everyone once again to the ISA podcast, Independently Speaking. I'm your host, Helen Stanton-Tonner, the Director of Education and Inclusion for ISA. Today, we are continuing our series that dives into one of the most pressing issues faced by schools across the globe, supporting the mental health and well-being of our students. The Independent Schools Association has members across all types and phases of school, with their commonality being their independence. So it won't surprise our listeners to hear that we also count boarding schools within that number. For this episode of our podcast, we have been welcomed to TASIS England, a leading international boarding school who cater for families from all over the world at their beautiful campus in Surrey. Now, speaking to me today are three members of the boarding team who not only have a wealth of experience in education, but are also at the front line when it comes to student wellbeing. I'd like to welcome Dan Giannini, Elaine Luckham, Tim Wainwright. Thank you for joining us on this episode.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Helen.
Now, for this episode, we're going to explore how resilience and positive mental health is promoted through the boarding experience. Dan, if I could start with you, how do you and your team really define what resilience is? And what role do you think it plays in supporting student mental health?
I think when we're looking at resilience, we're looking at our students who are growing and they've spent some time with us and we support them through our programs. We've got lots of students who need to develop their resilience, and they'll do that, whether that be through a Thrive program, which I'm sure Elaine will share with us a bit later, and how their mental health is steadied through that.
Can I add something in? I think I totally agree with what Dan said, and I think we're about turning the traditional definition of resilience, not on its head, but it's always been equated with toughness. And I think what we're helping our students understand that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to take time to learn, to grow, to heal. And resilience, I think, now needs to mean a whole new thing other than just speed in recovery and toughness. It's about growth, it's about learning, it's about vulnerability. Yeah.
Tied in with that, we're all house parents as well as our other individual roles, and with our very mixed diversity of cultures that we get here and different nations that we get in our school, helping them meet each other, meet different cultures, different expectations, often away from away from homes on totally different time zones, totally different food, totally different weather, all these sorts of things, just helping them mix and helping them come together in different ways and see different things and get over that initial sort of shock, if you like, of being at a new school in a new country. All these things feed in indirectly, maybe, into resilience as well. So however you define resilience, it's a multifaceted approach. It's not just sort of this one works, this works, this works. I think it's the whole package that we try and do.
It's building that adaptability, isn't it, with our students, and there are a multiple of stresses that they come across, and it's how we support them and how actually they support each other, which is, I think, a really good point.
And it is a very individual thing as well.
Yeah.
And you're talking very much, so obviously you've got different cultures coming together, and and you have a TASIS here has a very strong ethos of acceptability, and how do you think that you can develop that culture so that the students who come in with that vulnerability feel secure?
I mean, from a perspective of Thrive, our wellbeing and mentoring programme, we have resources our mentors can use with students that are looking at exploring the difference between fitting in and belonging. So fitting in is an uncomfortable position to be in, because I will mould myself to be who I think you need me to be. Whereas belonging is I'm authentically myself and I feel comfortable to be that, whatever that means to me. And so that's a conversation from a mentoring perspective that we have in the school with our boarding students.
If I understood your question, sorry, I think it's also, it is part of that community, isn't it? So, realising that actually, despite those differences, the similarities are more important, and there are more similarities than there are differences. So it's, I think in some, for little things like, for instance, we don't let our students, this year we've started not letting our students have mobile phones. So those ones that do want to hide, it's actually harder for them to sort of hide behind their screen. They've actually, we're promoting them having to take a sort of deep breath and going out, which can only be good, I think. And I think we're seeing very positive sort of outcomes of that. I've heard nothing but positivity about it, and our students are very much, there's my phone.
And that's during the school day. Yeah.
And have you seen it, obviously, with your role as mental health lead, have you seen positive so far with them not having their phones with them?
Most definitely. It's interesting because we thought when it first, we would get that pushback from the students. And there was a little mumble, sort of, we want to take our phones into school. But as Tim's, it was surprising how minimal.
First week, wasn't it?
But what's been clear is that we've had positives with their mental health, and I just remember a meeting I was in last week where we had students who were actively saying we want to not have their mobile phones even when they can have their mobile phones. And it was just really nice to hear a house parent say students take that upon themselves. They're going to go a week without, mobile phones, tablets, and that he was seeing them play board games. And that was just such a positive thing to hear. The interaction is obvious, that they're spending more time with each other. It can only be a good thing.
One of the great learning things for me, just from that simple example, is that if any school is trying to introduce something that they think might make a difference, just do it, because chances are there won't be much pushback against it. Chances are the kids are incredibly flexible and will just go for it. It might be a little bit of hoo-ha now and again, but just try it, do it. Try, if something you're doing is not working, try something different.
And what I will say is we hear a lot of positives, but before that, I heard a lot of negatives when they were using their phones and they were text messaging each other, that, maybe unpleasant messages. The young people, they're trying to learn to communicate, and when they're doing that through tablets, texts, it's often doesn't end well, unfortunately. So they need to learn, they need to have an education about that, and they are doing that now by seeing each other face to face rather than sending a message.
Yeah, no, that's great, and it's a good life skill, isn't it, to actually build those relationships without the screen sort of in front of them. Now, Elaine, you mentioned the Thrive programme. Could you tell our listeners a little bit more about this and sort of where it came about and how you use it?
Yes, we're in our third year with it. We introduced it as a pilot initially as we knew we wanted to introduce life skills, social and emotional development. Boarding community offers a perfect opportunity to teach our young people about all sorts of things, from personal budgeting to building resilience. And it started its life as a 35-week programme of set topics, and we decided to deliver that within a one-to-one mentoring system, because mentoring is an evidence-based means of providing support and guidance. And so our students, the thing that was true then is true now, is that our students are each allocated a mentor within the boarding team, so the house parents and the tutors. What's changed is that through annual staff and student feedback, and I've just completed an action research report for the BSA, so some evidence that's come out of that research is that make the connection first. So our students are very busy in school with a heavy timetable. If they feel a timetable also coming at them within the boarding programme, that's a no. And so we had some resistance of students meeting with their mentors. But once we switched it to a much more student-led programme, mentors and mentees take time at the beginning of the year to connect, to get to know each other, and then the students bring their own topics. I'd like to discuss this today. I have a friendship issue, or I'm stressed about my exams, or I have generalised anxiety. There's the connection and the trust and the rapport there with which to back those conversations into. So it's connection above all else now. And the topics flow from there. The students, the mentors have a full range of resources to use to address more or less any topic a student could wish to bring. And we're just sending out today our mid-year surveys to get this year's feedback about how we're doing and how we can tweak it for next year.
And that feedback comes back from all of the students?
The students and the staff involved, yeah.
And Dan, have you noticed since the Thrive programme's been in place, have you seen positive interactions amongst the students as well as their ability to cope with everyday life at school?
Yeah, I think seeing how they manage, you can see the education that they're getting through the Thrive programme. It's also, we've developed a young man's sort of Thrive, if you like, through the Growth Project, which is something I've recently set up, which is for a group of young men where we arrange a sports, and then we have an opportunity to talk about things. Some of our young men find it a little bit more challenging to chat about certain subjects or to talk about certain subjects. So we try and link that to a sport, basketball, football, whatever it might be. And then we have a 10 minutes, 15 minutes sit down after that. And I've noticed how much more open and willing they are to do that. And I think that's partly to do with Thrive as well, because they know that they can talk to us. The other thing Elaine has set up is that we don't just do Thrive with our own students. So, for example, last year I was just doing Thrive with the boys in my dorm. I can have those conversations at any time with the boys in my dorm. It's now expanded that I'm seeing students from other dorms. And I just think that builds relationships. It helps with that safe environment that they can come up and connect with any member of staff where they might not have known me so much last year. Now they know me and they can have those conversations.
That sounds great, and it sounds, you're right, in building a community, and you're quite a tight-knit community in the way that the school functions, and quite often boarding schools, they are like that.
Could I just add one thing on that? Sorry, it's just on the Thrive thing, just to add a little bit. So as a house parent, again, I have my own Thrive mentees, some of which are in my house and some of which are in other places. But I think one of the great things about it is, for me, if we look at house parenting and focus on the parent side of the title, the fact that you can have these conversations with kids, which is about the way they feel, what they're looking forward to in the holidays, what they're not, their relationships, and then still have those other discussions about you're late, your uniform's not right, all these things. You are in effect becoming more and more like a parent, where you're doing discipline, for want of a better word, but you're also doing pastoral. You're doing the caring and you're doing the you've got to get this done sort of thing. So I really enjoy that, and I think certainly one of my reflections on it is I think the students genuinely see you as a parent across the board. Yes, their job is to hold me to account, but also their job is to make sure I'm feeling all right. And that, I think, is something, that isn't necessarily appreciated about the role of a house parent. I think it's very easy to focus on, the discipline side and say that, well, the kids don't want to talk about this, but actually they probably do.
And through the Thrive programme, what you've done is you've given them the structure to be able to do that and to build those relationships.
So they know every week or 2 weeks we're going to have a Thrive meeting. We're going to sit down and talk about feelings and emotions, whatever it's going to be. But that morphs into sort of an everyday thing as well after a while, once they become sort of comfortable with it. And having done it for 2 or 3 years now, certainly those boarders who are returning, it is part of their sort of routines, and it becomes more so. And so when the new ones arrive, they're like, what's this Thrive thing? And the other boarders are going, well, it's just sit down, have a chat, and you get to know, and it just develops from there. So it's a really nice way of having a gentle sort of into who you are, and not because they can't. Sorry, it's the wrong phraseology, but because they can't escape it. it's becomes, like I said, part of their routine and something that they engage with. Some faster than others, but generally speaking, they do, I think.
And it comes back to where we started, resilience, because through the mentoring conversations, because we're building in staff training, so we're upskilling as mentors and understanding the value and beauty of sitting in silence and letting a student talk, not finishing sentences, not interrupting, letting students become comfortable and understand the power of that. So they hear their own thinking, they start to see themselves as a resource. So we're building in coaching and mentoring conversation models that are solution focused. We're not jumping in to solve things. We're assuming that the mind that has found a problem probably also holds the solution somewhere. And in just coaxing that with good listening, good questions, students are sensing themselves as a resource. And to me, that's resilience in action.
And they will be having those conversations with each other as well, won't they?
Yes,
So
yeah.
you're just building those skills across the board and embedding it in what we do.
Yeah.
And that's where the social and emotional growth I see with the students has developed. And as Elaine says, as us as staff, active listening, we are developing those skills as well. And we do that through house parents through to tutors as well who spend time with them.
And they're really powerful skills and really powerful concepts, aren't they? And as you said,
Yes.
Tim, the students will start, in a sense, supporting each other, using following the same pattern that they see you as the adults doing.
I believe that they must be. Yeah, I mean, they are. They are. But, and that, again, will go through, help them as parents and help them, the whole thing. So it's a win-win.
And Tim, Dan mentioned earlier about the fact that that he's now moved on to help develop some sort of, discussions with young men. Also, part of your role is leading the Quest program, your activities program. Could you describe that a little bit to the listeners and how that's developed?
Yeah. So as you sort of mentioned at the beginning, we're in a lovely position just outside London here. We're beautiful grounds. We have the ability to travel and do a lot of things as well. So. When I first came here, it was quite clear, I suppose, that we weren't necessarily, as an international school, we weren't necessarily making the most of the opportunities that we have all around us, and we weren't, necessarily showing our students what, all the things in life that they are lucky enough to be able to access. So we started to develop the program at weekends, and it's grown over the last 4 or 5 years, so that now we're in a situation where every weekend we have a major trip out on a Saturday, usually for somewhere around 20 to 30 students, and that could be, we divide those into sort of best of British things, so we can see the Tower of London and Houseparent, Windsor Castle, whatever it's going to be. Cultural things, so we've just recently come back from the Chinese, Lunar New Year celebrations in London. We do social and experiential things, so there's things like paintballing and team building, and I think we're going trampolining this weekend, and we've got swimming and all sorts of stuff like that. And then other sort of learning, exploration things, sort of arts, museums and various things like that. So we try and sort of get the balance right and give our students the opportunity to, dip in and out of those things when they want. And so obviously there's an educational aspect to it, though not a sort of classroom educational aspect. There's a lot of things to do with community events that we're building into it as well and tying all those in. Like I say, there's team building, they can go places with their friends. Being in London is not just about, the shopping and the posh restaurants and all that sort of stuff. It's about other bits and pieces, working out public transport, how that works, seeing some things they wouldn't necessarily see, like Borough Market or Camden Market, and just getting a feeling what London's like with their friends, making new connections with new people on trips they wouldn't necessarily otherwise go on, taking a little bit of responsibility for themselves to be at a certain time, at a certain place, so we can pick them up and bring them back. They have to make the decision on a Monday or a Tuesday where they're signing up for these trips, so they've got to make the, speak to their friends, who wants to go, do we, don't we? I can't wait till last minute and go, oh, I don't fancy it, or I do fancy it because I've made a commitment. And so again, it's mainly experiential. It's about taking them away from what they would otherwise fall into, just the same old restaurants, same old shopping, same old bits and pieces, seeing other things, but also building into that, building friendships, making decisions, having conversations, just having experiences that they might not realise are important right now, but it feeds into what Elaine was talking about with Thrive and what Dan's talking about with those conversations and those mental health things. So with a bit of luck, the whole thing sort of, the jigsaw starts to come together. And all the way around, they can, they just have this resilience, or they have this decision making, and they just talk and have better conversations.
And do you feel these experiences are giving them a stronger sense of belonging and community?
I think, first of all, we've got to put the caveat that, we have 250 boarders, and I don't take 250 boarders out every weekend. But I think certainly there is a cohort that do it all the time. So that, within our bigger community, there are different communities there, and they do talk about it. And I get emails, what's the trip next week? Or I know it's not advertised yet, but can I sign up to this? So they are engaging more and more with the community, and the weekends are, they're seeing our school not just like a Monday to Friday school and you're on your own at the weekends, but it is a 7 days a week school. The community is growing. Parents are involved more and more about what's going on and how do I get my children on this. We do theatre trips, which is fantastic. So they're seeing it depends how one defines community, doesn't it? But, they're seeing the community of, culture and Britain and London, however, as well as like global thing. They're taking these ideas back home. We're diving in with food and different sort of street foods and community events. So again, you've got how you define community. It depends, but I feel it does. I also just feel it's a good thing to do. Give them something to do at the weekends. It's just we're very lucky, we're very privileged, but I feel it's the right thing to do as well.
Absolutely, and as Dan, as Tim was saying, that you mentioned families. You don't take a student on without taking on the parents and the family as well. Yes. How do you find that their involvement has increased over the years, particularly possibly since COVID?
Yeah, I think our parents definitely want to be involved. They want to know what's going on. They want to see the pictures. They want to see a video of when Tim's taken them out. And we very much sort of communicate that through telephone calls, sometimes emails. Unfortunately, it has to be emails sometimes because of the locations of parents. But they want to keep up to date on what their children are doing. So we send out newsletters on a regular basis. We send out individual communication to parents. We talk to them. Yeah, there's a live Facebook page. We're talking about getting a folder available so they can see all the pictures that are available and they can see what's going on from day to day. And I think that's really important. The kids want to be seen by their parents and vice versa. It's very much, I have to speak to some of the students and they'll want to say that they'll share their parents' feelings about what's going on and how they're missing them and vice versa. And that's a very strong feeling that I get from some of the students. Homesick. I'm sure every house parent that works with students, there will be a homesick child, more than one, and it's how we counteract that really, and how we also have parents who come on site. They'll come and visit, they'll come and spend time with them, but it's bringing that closeness together. With their house parents, we're not their parents, but it's really important we build that closeness and they understand we're working with them. There's also behavioural issues sometimes that they need to know that we're working alongside parents, that they can't play people off against each other. So, yeah, that comes up very much.
I've certainly noticed the last 2 or 3 years that we're getting more and more children of alumni coming back, and the alumni will come and say, when I was here it was like, this is so much better than I was here. And I think we underestimate how important that is, that feeling of generation to generation and word of mouth and being able to, we go on October trips and things, and just the videos we send out and the communication with parents and the stuff that comes back, and then weekend trips, and then all the stuff that's going on, the sports and all this sort of thing. And when it's all fed back and the parents are thinking, God, we're getting really good value for money here, because let's be honest, boarding is expensive. But if they're getting good value for money, they buy into it, and they're more likely to send their other children here, and their friends, they'll tell their friends about it. And that, going back to our community, that's how the community grows. When siblings and their parents and the whole families are involved more and more and more. And when you can communicate, however you can manage to do that, it's got to be a good thing.
And I think our challenge is, just as we have reticent or unsure students. We have reticent and unsure parents who
Yeah.
don't understand the culture of boarding and might be very unsure about how much they should be communicating with us, whether it's welcome. And we need to be just as good as being warm and welcoming with them as we are with their children, to help them understand the culture of boarding, and that boarding works best when parents, students and staff are in that relationship together. And I think where there might be, we can't assume where there's silence, they might be desperate for that link, that communication, and it's up to us to find the means to bring them in, I think.
We've never heard, have we, parents saying, you're communicating too much with us,
No.
you're doing too many things with our
No,
children, or anything
no.
like that, you know.
Yeah.
And when it comes to some of our students' mental health, what we do make sure is that our health centre is communicating with parents and our counsellors are communicating with parents as well. It needs to be that circle that we're here to look after you. Got any questions, please ask.
And that's particularly important, isn't it? Because you said you're allowing these students to be vulnerable and to have these conversations. But obviously sometimes those students may have faced trauma or adversity, and it's important that those communication links are circular, isn't it? So that the parents are very aware of what is going on. What do you think your school could take in terms of an approach to ensure that resilience building is inclusive and accessible to all of your students? What is it that you do to make sure that nobody gets left behind?
Oh, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I think we're on a journey with that, because we do have programmes in boarding that day students don't have. We have the Thrive programme.
Yeah.
We're talking about how transferable that is. Students, all the students have advisors over in school, and they have PHSE lessons. But, you know, is there the opportunity to develop a programme similar to Thrive, so that where we know our boarders have that solid relationship to build those conversations from and discuss these topics with someone, is that happening in the day? School?
Sorry,
No, I was just going to say we have the benefit of time as well, which
I think we have some really positive programmes that are working out in the boarding, and we have some educational sort of Thrive. It used to be called PSHE, but it's not anymore. It's we have students who will go to lessons, and they'll have a similar sort of Thrive lesson, but it is a lesson, and our students see it as a lesson. And I think what Elaine is talking about is the students bringing those thoughts to what works for me will work in the school, and we need to develop that, and there's room for that. I think we need to look at what's working really well, and I think there's been some really positive movements over the last couple of years in boarding that I think we're really pleased with, and we've seen changes, and it's just about how we can interact our school students. Are there students who are missing out on that in boarding? I don't think we're perfect. I think there's always room for improvement, and I think we're always looking at that. And I think feedback from students is the best way we can get some information about that. And I think Elaine and others are working at that. So
there is a in a broader school there is an inclusivity committee, isn't there?
Yes.
That we have that, which has staff and students on it. I think it's something we're becoming more and more aware of. Again, you know, we have such a broad range of cultures in our school that, you know, something that I might take very much for granted and say, well, this should happen, other people will find very challenging for themselves. So I think it is certainly a question that we would hold a mirror up to ourselves and say, are we doing enough? What can we do more? And I think the three of us here would certainly agree that there is a lot more that we should be doing. What that road looks like from here on in, you know, you'd have to ask someone wiser than I am. But I think it's certainly in the narrower boarding perspective, the things that Dan and Elaine certainly are focusing on doing much more, it can only help with that. But it is a much broader issue that I feel.
I think for me, a baseline with Thrive and the mentoring programme is, of course, we have students who don't want to engage with it, and we have to respect that. But we keep trying. So what we will do as mentors is, if a student is not turning up for their mentoring meeting, and they will all miss one or two for various reasons, but if they are consistently evading, we don't. We still check in. We still go find them and say, just checking in. Or we send an email and say, I'm still here, whenever. So that even if if a student is here for a year, and at the end of that year they've met with their mentor once as an initial introduction and then said, well, for whatever reason they have, this isn't for me. And we do ask, we do try and find out what that barrier is. That when they leave TASIS and reflect back, that person remained doggedly interested in them regardless. It was an unconditional, but I'm interested in you, even if at the time the student couldn't or wouldn't engage in it. And I think that's the baseline we'd be looking for in any programme that also included our day students. Just somebody who is willing to check in regardless.
Yes, that sounds amazing and really important, I think, to know that the person is always there and isn't going to go away.
Yes.
Yeah. As we draw this conversation to a close, could I ask all three of you to think of a piece of advice that you would give any sort of boarding school or house parent who might be listening today, or maybe even a day school, who might feel anxious about the boarding experience a child might have? What piece of advice would you give them if they were going to step forward into setting up a programme sort of similar to what you've done, or to develop their own programme?
For me, it's a real cliche, but I thoroughly believe that in boarding, especially, the more you put in, the more you get out. And I just think, just try it. What's the worst that could happen? Just try it, and because the more you do put in, you do get stuff out. Maybe not straight away, but the children genuinely, they generally enjoy those relationships that they have with each other, but with members of staff as well. So just do it.
Yeah, and I would say having set up Thrive, and I spend time in the contemplative stage of your whatever programme you're setting up. Take time to plan. Take time to bring people on board with you, to communicate what it is that you're doing and how you're going to be doing it, to bring the team with you, to bring the parents with you, to bring the students with you, and take time doing that before you launch. It's always worth it. Pre-planning.
And I think I would say there are always students who are slipping through the gap. Look at why that might be. Look at what you can do to help those students. Talk to them, get some feedback from them, and then go for it. It really is, there's no reason why you shouldn't. The students are actually, they desperately want some support. There'll be times where I've sat upstairs and a student's just sat on a sofa. He's sitting on a sofa because he wants to talk but feels unable to communicate that, understand that, read the body language and reach out.
Thank you. This has been a really informative conversation, and I hope our listeners have gained insight into the effective ways that boarding schools can not only support student mental health, but also help them build the resilience scaffolding they need as they venture into their lives after school. Elaine, Tim and Dan, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and strategies with us today. Your dedication to this really important issue has been really clear. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To our audience, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the ISA podcast series. We've continued to cover the importance of evolving mental health strategies and promoting resilience. If you found this episode helpful, make sure you subscribe to past and future episodes where we'll continue exploring crucial topics in education. Stay curious, stay connected, and we'll be back soon with more insights and inspiration. Until next time.
You've been listening to Independently Speaking, the podcast of the Independent Schools Association. For more information about ISA and the schools we support, please visit isaschools.org.uk.